What could a 17-year-old kid possibly do to make 50 United States Marines show up on his street before sunrise? The question spread through the neighborhood faster than the flashing lights reflecting across the quiet windows of Maple Grove Lane. At 5:12 on a chilly Tuesday morning, curtains shifted all along the block as sleepy residents peeked outside. The low rumble of military vehicles rolled through the still darkness, their headlights cutting across trimmed lawns and white picket fences. Engines idled. Doors opened. Uniformed Marines stepped onto the pavement with calm precision. Within minutes, nearly 50 of them stood along the street. No one understood why. No one could explain what was happening. Then one Marine pointed toward a modest blue house near the end of the cul-de-sac. "That's the one," he said. A nervous whisper moved from porch to porch. People exchanged worried looks. Some assumed a crime had been committed. Others wondered if someone inside had some secret connection to the military. Whatever the reason, everyone was watching the same house now. The Brooks family home. Inside, Jaden Brooks was still asleep. His bedroom was small, tucked beneath a slanted ceiling painted years ago by his late father. A second-hand desk sat beneath the window. School textbooks were stacked beside a worn baseball glove. Nothing about the room suggested the kind of attention that could bring dozens of Marines to a quiet North Carolina neighborhood. Yet outside, the street looked more like the scene of a major event than a normal suburban morning. Across the road, Mrs. Henderson stepped onto her porch in a bathrobe, holding a coffee mug with trembling hands. She counted the uniforms twice because the number seemed impossible. On the corner, a delivery driver slowed his truck and stared. Even the local police cruiser parked near the entrance of the subdivision appeared uncertain about what exactly was unfolding. The rising sun had not yet cleared the tree line, leaving the world washed in blue-gray shadows. Cold air drifted through the neighborhood as the Marines remained perfectly composed. No one was shouting. No one was rushing. They simply waited. The silence somehow made everything more unsettling. Then the front door of the blue house opened. A woman stepped outside wearing hospital scrubs beneath a winter coat. Denise Brooks had just returned from an overnight nursing shift. Exhaustion lined her face, but it vanished the moment she saw the military vehicles. Her eyes widened. She froze on the porch. One hand tightened around her car keys. For several seconds, she could only stare. A senior Marine officer walked forward, his polished shoes crunching softly against the frosted grass. He stopped at the bottom of the walkway and removed his cap. The gesture confused everyone watching. Denise looked from the officer to the long line of Marines stretching down the street. Her breathing quickened. Somewhere behind a curtain upstairs, Jaden finally woke to the unusual glow of headlights shining through his bedroom window. He had no idea that every person in the neighborhood was looking toward his house. He had no idea that strangers in uniform had traveled hundreds of miles to find him. And he certainly had no idea that everything began with a simple act of kindness and a $3 sandwich shared with an old homeless woman everyone else had forgotten. 24 hours earlier, there had been no military vehicles, no curious neighbors, and no mystery surrounding the Brooks family home. There was only Jaden Brooks finishing another long day the way he always did. The final school bell had rung at 3:15 in the afternoon, and by 4 o'clock he was already tying on a red apron inside Miller's Market Grill, a small family-owned sandwich shop tucked between a hardware store and a laundromat. The scent of fresh bread and grilled turkey filled the air while old country music drifted from a radio near the register. Jaden worked 5 evenings a week. He wiped tables, stocked supplies, carried out trash, and helped prepare orders. The pay was modest, but every dollar mattered. Since his father passed away 4 years earlier from an illness, life had become a careful balancing act for the Brooks family. His mother worked long overnight shifts as a nurse, and Jaden did whatever he could to help, with groceries, utility bills, and school expenses. Despite the pressure, most people knew him as the kid who smiled anyway. He was not the star athlete at school. He was not the class president. He was simply the kind of young man who held doors open, carried groceries for elderly neighbors, and remembered people's names. Every evening at exactly 7:45, after cleaning the final counter and clocking out, Jaden followed the same route home. He crossed Oak Street, passed the old library, and walked by the downtown bus station. That was where he first noticed her nearly 6 months earlier. Most people barely looked in her direction. She sat on a weathered bench beneath a towering red maple tree near the far end of the station parking lot. Her silver hair spilled from beneath a faded knit cap. Her coat looked older than some of the buildings nearby. During summer heat and autumn rain, she remained there with a small canvas bag resting beside her feet. People passed by every day without speaking. Some looked away. Others pretended not to see her at all. The first time Jaden stopped, he had simply asked if she was hungry. The elderly woman had looked up with surprise in her pale blue eyes, as if nobody had asked her that question in years. He returned 10 minutes later carrying a turkey sandwich and a bottle of water. She thanked him quietly. The next evening, he did the same thing. Then the evening after that. Weeks became months. Eventually, it became part of his routine, as natural as brushing his teeth or doing homework. He never considered it charity. To him, it felt more like friendship. Her name was Margaret Hayes. She never spoke much about her past. Whenever Jaden asked where she was from, she would smile gently and change the subject. Yet there was something unusual about her. She spoke with remarkable clarity. Her posture remained straight despite her age. Sometimes she would casually mention places she had visited decades earlier, military bases, coastal towns, distant cities across the country. Other times, she would sit quietly watching the sunset paint the clouds gold and orange above the station. Jaden never pushed for answers. He brought her food because she needed it, not because he expected a story. What he did not realize was that every sandwich, every conversation, and every small act of kindness was slowly setting into motion something far larger than either of them could imagine. As autumn settled deeper across the town, the evenings grew colder. The red maple leaves around the bus station drifted onto the pavement one by one, gathering in rust-colored piles that crackled beneath passing shoes. Most people hurried through the area with their heads down, eager to reach warm cars and heated homes before the temperature dropped below 50 degrees. Margaret remained on her familiar bench, wrapped in her aging coat, watching the world move around her. Yet something had changed. She was no longer completely alone. Nearly every evening, Jaden appeared carrying a paper bag from Miller's Market Grill. Sometimes it held a turkey sandwich. Other times it was soup in a container with an extra spoon tucked inside. On colder nights, he brought hot chocolate. He never made a speech about kindness. He never posted pictures online. He simply sat beside her and shared part of his evening. One Thursday, a steady drizzle covered the town. Streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, turning the parking lot into a patchwork of gold and silver. Jaden arrived carrying an umbrella that barely protected either of them from the rain. Margaret accepted a cup of chicken noodle soup and smiled faintly. "You keep spending money on me," she said softly. "You should save it for yourself." Jaden shrugged. "I am saving it for myself." She looked confused. "How?" He opened his soup container and took a spoonful. "Because if I eat alone, dinner lasts 10 minutes. If I eat with someone, it lasts an hour." For a moment, Margaret stared at him without speaking. Then she laughed. The sound was warm and genuine, the kind of laugh that seemed unfamiliar after years of silence. Over the following weeks, their conversations grew longer. She asked about school. He told her about difficult math tests and college applications. She asked about his mother. He spoke proudly about Denise working overnight shifts at the hospital. Sometimes Margaret shared pieces of her own life, though never enough to reveal the full picture. She seemed to know unusual things. One evening, a military helicopter crossed the sky far above the town. Most people barely noticed it. Margaret watched it until it disappeared beyond the clouds. "That is a CH-53, she said casually. Jaden blinked. "You know helicopters?" "A little." "How?" A mysterious smile crossed her face. "I have met a few pilots." Another night, she correctly identified military ribbons on a veteran's jacket from nearly 50 yards away. Jaden noticed, but did not question her. The more time he spent with Margaret, the more he realized there was a story hidden behind her tired eyes. Yet she carried herself with quiet dignity. She never begged for money. She never complained. She thanked him for every meal as though it were a gift far greater than food. Not everyone understood their friendship. Several people walking through the station occasionally glanced at Jaden with puzzled expressions. A few classmates even noticed him sitting with Margaret one afternoon. The next day at school, whispers followed him through the hallway. One student smirked and asked why he spent so much time with a homeless stranger. Another joked that he was wasting money. Jaden ignored them. Their opinions mattered far less than the smile he saw on Margaret's face each evening. What he did not know was that Margaret paid attention to those moments. She noticed every time he chose kindness despite judgment. She noticed every sacrifice hidden inside those simple meals. And deep inside, she was carrying a secret that would soon change not only Jaden's life, but the entire town's understanding of who she really was. December arrived with sharp winds and shorter days. By the time Jaden finished his shift each evening, darkness had already settled across the town. Christmas lights glowed from storefront windows, and holiday music drifted through the streets. But near the bus station, the cold seemed heavier somehow. One evening, the temperature dropped below 35 degrees. A thin layer of frost covered parked cars, and people hurried from building to building with their hands buried deep inside their coats. As Jaden walked toward the familiar bench beneath the maple tree, he noticed Margaret sitting unusually still. The paper bag containing her dinner felt warm in his hands, but concern crept into his chest. Her face looked pale beneath the glow of a nearby streetlight. "You okay?" he asked as he sat down. Margaret offered a small smile. "Just tired tonight." Jaden handed her a hot bowl of soup and a thick roll wrapped in foil. "You should probably be somewhere warmer." Margaret looked toward the distant lights of downtown. Sometimes life does not always take you where you plan to go. Jaden hesitated. He had heard her say things like that before. Quiet sentences that seemed simple at first, but carried deeper meaning underneath. He glanced at the old canvas bag resting beside her feet. It looked worn from years of use. A corner of a photograph peeked from one of the side pockets. Before he could look away, a gust of wind flipped part of the picture into view. Jaden only saw it for a second. A much younger Margaret stood beside several people wearing military uniforms. Behind them was a large American flag. The image disappeared as quickly as it appeared. Margaret calmly tucked it back into the bag. Neither mentioned it. Instead, she sipped her soup and stared at the steam rising into the cold night air. A few minutes later, laughter echoed from the far side of the station. Several young men around college age walked through the parking lot carrying shopping bags and coffee cups. One of them noticed Margaret. His smile faded into a look of annoyance. "She is still here," he muttered loudly enough for others to hear. Another shook his head. "Town keeps helping people who never do anything." Jaden felt his jaw tighten. Margaret simply lowered her eyes to her soup. The group continued walking, their voices fading into the distance. Silence settled between them for several moments. Finally, Jaden spoke. "People do not know your story." Margaret looked at him. "And what if they did? Maybe they would treat you differently." A faint smile touched her face. "Kind people do not need a story before they care." The words lingered in the cold air. Jaden sat quietly after that. Streetlights reflected in small puddles left by melting frost. Cars passed in the distance. Somewhere a church bell chimed 8 o'clock. When he finally stood to leave, Margaret reached into her coat pocket and removed something small. It was an old silver coin worn smooth with age. She placed it in his hand. "Keep this for me," she said. Jaden looked down at it. An eagle was engraved on one side. The metal felt surprisingly heavy. "Why?" Margaret gazed toward the dark horizon beyond the station. "Because I have a feeling something is about to change." Before Jaden could ask what she meant, she simply smiled and pulled her coat tighter around herself. He slipped the coin into his pocket and started the walk home. Behind him, Margaret remained beneath the maple tree, watching him disappear into the glow of the streetlights, her expression carrying the weight of a secret she had guarded for many years. The next afternoon, gray clouds blanketed the sky from horizon to horizon. The air felt damp and heavy, carrying the scent of approaching rain through the streets of town. Classes ended just after 3 o'clock, and Jaden headed straight to work as usual. Yet throughout the day, he found himself thinking about the silver coin resting in his jacket pocket. Margaret's words echoed in his mind. Something is about to change. He could not explain why the sentence bothered him. Maybe it was the unusual seriousness in her voice. Maybe it was the way she had watched him leave the night before. Whatever the reason, a quiet sense of unease followed him through his shift at the sandwich shop. By 7:30 that evening, rain had begun tapping against the windows. Customers hurried in and out carrying umbrellas while wind rattled the storefront signs outside. When Jaden finally clocked out, he immediately prepared Margaret's usual meal. A turkey sandwich, a cup of soup, and a small slice of apple pie that one of the cooks had set aside. He tucked everything carefully into a paper bag and stepped into the cold night. Rain drizzled steadily as he crossed Oak Street and headed toward the bus station. The closer he got, the faster his footsteps became. Something felt wrong. The bench beneath the maple tree came into view through the mist. Empty. Jaden stopped. His stomach tightened. Margaret had never missed an evening. Not once in 6 months. He scanned the station parking lot. No sign of her. He checked the nearby shelter entrance. Nothing. Rainwater trickled from the brim of his hood as concern grew heavier inside him. Then he noticed a familiar canvas bag resting near a light pole several yards away. Margaret's bag. It sat alone on the wet pavement. Jaden hurried toward it. The sight sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the weather. He found Margaret sitting nearby beneath a covered section of the station roof. Her shoulders leaned against the brick wall. Her eyes were closed. She looked exhausted. Margaret. Jaden knelt beside her. Her eyes opened slowly. A weak smile appeared. You came. Of course I came. He placed the food beside her. Are you sick? She attempted to sit straighter, but seemed to struggle. The answer was obvious. Even in the dim light, he could see how pale she looked. Her breathing sounded shallow. The usual spark in her eyes seemed distant. I think I am just tired, she whispered. Jaden shook his head. No, this is more than tired. Thunder rumbled faintly somewhere beyond town. Rain drummed against the station roof. Margaret looked toward the dark sky. You know, Jaden, people spend their whole lives searching for important things. He frowned. Margaret, you need a doctor. She smiled faintly. And sometimes the important thing is sitting right beside them the whole time. Jaden reached for his phone. I am calling an ambulance. For the first time, concern crossed her face. No fuss. Too late. His voice was gentle but firm. Minutes later, flashing emergency lights reflected across the rain-soaked pavement. Paramedics arrived and carefully helped Margaret onto a stretcher. As they prepared to leave, she reached for Jaden's hand. Her grip felt surprisingly weak. She looked directly into his eyes. Do not lose that coin. Jaden swallowed hard. I will not. Margaret nodded once. Then she quietly added, someone has been searching for me for a very long time. Before he could ask what she meant, the ambulance doors closed. The red lights disappeared into the rainy darkness, leaving Jaden standing alone beneath the maple tree, holding the silver coin in one hand and feeling as though the world had just shifted beneath his feet. The hospital waiting room felt unusually quiet after midnight. Soft lighting reflected across polished floors while the steady hum of ventilation filled the empty spaces between distant conversations. Jaden sat alone near a large window overlooking the rain-soaked parking lot. Water streamed down the glass in silver ribbons, blurring the red and white lights of passing cars into streaks of color. The paper wristband given to visitors rested loosely around his arm. He had called his mother as soon as the ambulance left the bus station. Denise arrived shortly afterward, still wearing her nursing scrubs from another long shift. Now she sat beside him, holding a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Neither spoke much. Some moments felt too heavy for words. Every few minutes Jaden found himself reaching into his pocket and touching the silver coin Margaret had given him. The metal felt cool against his fingertips. Somehow it grounded him. It reminded him that she was real, that the friendship they had built over 6 months was not just another passing chapter in life. Denise finally broke the silence. You care about her a lot. Jaden stared through the rain-covered window. She should not have been out there alone. His mother nodded slowly. No one should. Across the room, a television mounted near the ceiling played muted late-night news. Images flashed across the screen unnoticed by most visitors. Weather reports, traffic updates, national headlines. Yet Jaden barely registered any of it. His thoughts remained fixed on the elderly woman who had spent months sitting beneath a maple tree. The same woman who somehow knew military aircraft by sound and recognized service ribbons from a distance. The same woman who carried a photograph she never explained and a silver coin she had trusted him to keep. Around 1 o'clock, a nurse stepped into the waiting area. Jaden immediately stood. How is she? The nurse offered a gentle smile. She is stable. The doctors are running tests. Relief washed through him so quickly that he had to sit back down. Stable. It was not a complete answer, but it was enough for now. Outside, the rain continued falling. The world seemed suspended between darkness and dawn. Time moved differently in hospitals. Minutes stretched into hours. The steady ticking of a wall clock became impossible to ignore. Somewhere down the hallway, a cart rolled across tile floors. A distant monitor beeped rhythmically. Life continued in small sounds. Jaden leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. Memories surfaced one after another. Margaret laughing beneath the maple tree. Margaret correcting his history homework from memory. Margaret sharing half of a cookie someone had given her. Tiny moments that suddenly felt precious. Then another memory returned. Someone has been searching for me for a very long time. Her final words before the ambulance doors closed. Jaden opened his eyes. The sentence felt different now. Larger somehow. He reached into his pocket and examined the silver coin beneath the waiting room lights. On one side was the eagle he had already seen. On the other side, however, he noticed something new. Tiny engraved lettering circled the edge. The words were worn with age but still readable. United States Marine Corps. Jaden stared at the coin. A strange feeling moved through him. Questions began forming faster than answers. Who exactly was Margaret Hayes? Why did she know so much about the military? Why had she carried that photograph? And who was the person she believed had been searching for her? Beyond the window, the rain finally began to slow. Clouds drifted across the night sky, revealing the faintest hint of moonlight. Somewhere in the darkness, events were already unfolding that neither Jaden nor his mother could possibly imagine. By sunrise, their quiet little world would never look the same again. At 5:12 in the morning, while most of the town was still waking up, events were unfolding with astonishing speed. Inside the hospital, Jaden had finally fallen asleep in a waiting room chair. His mother rested beside him, her head leaning against the wall. Neither of them noticed the nurse hurrying down a nearby hallway carrying a file. Neither saw the doctor making an urgent phone call. And neither knew that one name written deep inside Margaret Hayes' medical records had triggered a chain reaction reaching far beyond their small North Carolina town. Nearly 200 miles away, a black government vehicle rolled through the darkness toward a military installation. Inside sat a senior Marine officer staring at a photograph that had not left his possession in more than 15 years. The image showed a younger woman smiling beside a large American flag. Her name was Margaret Hayes. For years, countless searches had led nowhere. Records ended. Leads disappeared. Hope faded. Then, just hours earlier, a hospital administrator had entered identifying information into a national database. The result had generated an alert that immediately reached federal channels. By sunrise, confirmation arrived. Margaret Hayes had been found alive. Back at the hospital, the first rays of morning light filtered through the windows. Jaden stirred awake when he heard footsteps approaching. He blinked and looked up. A nurse stood nearby. "She is awake," the nurse said softly. Relief flooded through him. Moments later, he entered Margaret's room. The elderly woman looked tired, but there was color returning to her face. Sunlight touched the edge of her blanket. Machines hummed quietly nearby. When she saw Jaden, a warm smile appeared. "You kept the coin?" she asked. Jaden reached into his pocket and held it up. "Of course." Margaret nodded. Her eyes glistened slightly. "Good." He pulled a chair closer. "Margaret, who has been searching for you?" For a long moment she said nothing. Her gaze drifted toward the window where the morning sky was slowly brightening. Finally she whispered, "My son." Jaden sat still. "Your son?" Margaret nodded. "Daniel." The name seemed simple enough, yet the emotion behind it was unmistakable. "We lost contact many years ago, longer than I care to admit." Before Jaden could ask another question, movement outside the hospital window caught his attention. Several dark vehicles had just entered the parking lot. One became two. Two became five. More followed. Margaret noticed his expression and slowly turned her head. Her eyes widened. For the first time since he had known her, she appeared genuinely shocked. Men and women in Marine uniforms stepped from the vehicles. Some spoke into radios. Others moved quickly toward the hospital entrance. The scene below grew larger by the minute. Jaden rose from his chair and looked out the window in disbelief. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I think they are here for you." She pressed a trembling hand against her mouth. Tears gathered in her eyes. Down in the parking lot, one final vehicle came to a stop. The door opened. A tall Marine officer stepped out wearing the insignia of a general. His silver hair caught the morning sunlight. For several seconds, he simply stood there looking toward the hospital building. Then he began walking toward the entrance. Margaret stared at him through the glass. Her voice broke into a whisper. Daniel. For several seconds, nobody in the hospital room moved. The world seemed to narrow into a single moment, suspended between years of loss and the possibility of reunion. Through the window, General Daniel Hayes crossed the parking lot with purposeful strides, surrounded by Marines who maintained a respectful distance. His expression remained composed, but there was something in his eyes that revealed a deeper truth. Hope. The kind of hope that survives long after logic says it should disappear. Margaret's hands trembled as she watched him approach. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. Jaden stepped back toward the corner of the room, sensing that this moment belonged to someone else. A few minutes later, the door opened quietly. The general entered alone. The room fell completely silent. For a long time, neither he nor Margaret spoke. They simply looked at one another. Years seemed to pass across their faces in that single exchange. Then Daniel took a slow step forward. Mom. His voice cracked slightly on the word. Margaret covered her mouth as fresh tears appeared. Daniel. The general closed the remaining distance between them. He gently took her hands in his own as though afraid she might disappear if he moved too quickly. Neither cared who was watching. Neither cared about uniforms, rank, titles, or the years that had separated them. They were simply a mother and son finding each other again. Jaden felt his own eyes sting as he watched. Denise stood quietly beside him, equally moved. After several minutes, Daniel finally turned toward the young man standing near the wall. You are Jaden? He asked. Jaden nodded. The general studied him carefully. You are the one who helped her. Jaden shifted awkwardly. I just brought her food sometimes. A faint smile crossed Daniel's face. According to everyone I have spoken with, you did much more than that. He looked back toward his mother. For years we searched. We followed leads across multiple states. Every report ended in disappointment. Then yesterday, a hospital call changed everything. Margaret squeezed her son's hand. He never gave up. Daniel nodded. Never. His attention returned to Jaden. And neither did you. Later that morning, word quietly spread throughout the hospital. Doctors, nurses, and staff members learned the identity of the elderly woman many had assumed was simply another anonymous patient. They also learned about the teenager who had spent months caring for her when most people walked past without a second glance. Yet the moment that stayed with everyone happened shortly before noon. Daniel reached into his pocket and removed a folded photograph. It was the same picture Jaden had glimpsed weeks earlier inside Margaret's bag. Younger faces, Marine uniforms, smiles frozen in time. This was taken 22 years ago, Daniel explained. She carried it everywhere. Margaret looked at Jaden and smiled warmly. Some people spend their lives searching for heroes, she said softly. Sometimes they walk past one without noticing. Jaden immediately shook his head. I am not a hero. Margaret's eyes sparkled. Exactly. The answer seemed to mean more than any explanation could. Outside the hospital windows, morning sunlight filled the parking lot. Marines stood quietly near their vehicles. The long search was finally over. But before the day ended, there was still one more thing Daniel Hayes intended to do, and it involved the young man who had changed his mother's life without ever asking for anything in return. The following morning, the quiet neighborhood on Maple Grove Lane became the center of attention once again. Residents stood on porches and peered through windows as Marines lined the street with calm professionalism. The sight that had caused so much confusion now carried a very different meaning. This was not an investigation. It was gratitude. Jaden stood beside his mother on the front lawn, still struggling to understand how his ordinary life had changed so quickly. General Daniel Hayes approached him with Margaret walking slowly at his side. She looked stronger than she had in weeks. The winter sunlight reflected softly across her silver hair as a gentle breeze moved through the neighborhood trees. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Daniel reached into his jacket and removed a small presentation case. He opened it carefully. Inside rested a medal mounted against dark blue fabric. Jaden Brooks, he said, his voice carrying across the silent street. For months, you gave your time, your kindness, and your respect to someone the world had forgotten. You expected nothing in return. That is the definition of character. Jaden immediately shook his head. I was only helping a friend. A smile touched Daniel's face. Exactly. Several Marines nearby exchanged quiet nods. Margaret looked at Jaden with the same warmth she had shown him beneath the maple tree so many evenings before. Most people saw a homeless woman, she said softly. You saw a person. The neighborhood remained silent. Some residents lowered their eyes as they remembered walking past Margaret countless times without ever speaking to her. Others felt a quiet sense of regret. Yet there was no bitterness in Margaret's expression, only peace. Daniel presented the medal, but what affected Jaden most was not the recognition. It was the look on Margaret's face. After years of separation, uncertainty, and loneliness, she was finally standing beside her son again. That was the real reward. Several months later, spring arrived. The red maple tree near the bus station burst with fresh leaves. Flowers bloomed along the sidewalks, and warmer air returned to the town. One Saturday afternoon, Jaden followed a familiar route through downtown. When he reached the old bus station, he slowed his pace. The bench beneath the maple tree was still there, but now a small bronze plaque had been installed beside it. Sunlight glimmered across the engraved surface. Jaden stepped closer and read the inscription. Kindness is never wasted. The smallest act of compassion can change a life. He smiled. A few feet away, Margaret sat comfortably on the bench wearing a new coat while Daniel stood beside her. They were talking quietly, enjoying the afternoon together. For a moment, everything felt exactly as it should. Jaden slipped the silver Marine Corps coin from his pocket and turned it over in his hand. He had carried it every day since that rainy night. Not because it was valuable, but because it reminded him of a simple truth. You never know who someone is. You never know what burdens they carry. And you never know how far a small act of kindness can travel. The breeze rustled through the maple leaves overhead. Somewhere nearby, children laughed. Traffic hummed softly in the distance. Margaret looked up and waved. Jaden waved back. No speeches were needed. No grand ending was required. The quiet itself said everything. Sometimes the greatest stories begin with nothing more than a shared meal, a listening ear, and the decision to care when everyone else walks away.